Well, we're just hours away from a massive hurricane making landfall on the East Coast, but it's a Twitter storm that is making headlines tonight.
President Trump getting a lot of criticism tonight for several tweets that he made earlier today about Puerto Rico. The commander-in-chief tweeting, 3,000 people did not die in the two hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico. When I left the island after the storm had hit, they had anywhere from 6 to 18 deaths. As time went by, it did not go up by much. Then, a long time later, they started to report really large numbers, like 3,000. This was done by the Democrats in order to make me look as bad as possible when I was successfully raising billions of dollars to help rebuild Puerto Rico. If a person died for any reason like old age, just add them onto the list. Bad politics. I love Puerto Rico.
But is the president correct? Team 12's Joe Dana is verifying it for us. Joe?
When President Trump visited the island on October 3rd, 2017, 2 weeks after the storm, the official death toll was 16. The figure jumped to 34 later that day and eventually to 64. Now, the Puerto Rican government came under fire because humanitarian groups and others on the ground said the figure was too low. So the government commissioned George Washington University's Milken Institute to examine the data to determine the death toll. Both direct deaths, those who drowned or were killed by debris, and indirect deaths, such as health emergencies caused by a lack of medical care or car accidents on damaged roads. Since then, other studies from Harvard, Pennsylvania University, the Center for Investigative Reporting have all estimated the death toll to range in the hundreds, if not over 1,000. Finally, in August, George Washington U released its report estimated direct and indirect deaths between 2,600 and 3,290. The numbers were based on actual death certificates. The study concluded many more people died in the months after the storm than what is typical because of infrastructure failures on the island. For example, take a look at former Utah Governor Spencer Cox. He had this to say this morning. The tweet represents what a lot of people who have done humanitarian work there have said. Quote, "Look, guys, I spent 5 days volunteering in Puerto Rico several months after the hurricanes. After seeing the devastation firsthand, we all knew, without a doubt, that the death toll had to be in the thousands instead of the 18 initially reported. It was heartbreaking." So we can verify that President Trump's suggestion that the death toll should remain at 18 or somewhere around that number, and his suggestion that Democrats have inflated the numbers, is a false statement. Mark and Caribe, we'll send it back to you.